Chapter 4, Influence and Power. Power and Influence. Chapter outline. Introduction. Some important distinctions. Power and leadership. Influence, tactics, and summary. Introduction. Examine the phenomenon of power. Some of history's earliest characterizations of leaders concern their use of power. Shakespeare's plays were concerned with acquisition and the failing of power. Some important distinctions. Power, capacity to produce effects on others or the potential to influence others. Function of the leader, the followers, and the situation. It does not need to be exercised by leaders in order to have an effect. Attributed to others on the basis and frequency of influence tactics that use on their outcomes. Self-explanatory. Okay, important distinctions. Influence. Change in a target agent's attitudes, values, beliefs, or behaviors as a result of influence of tactics. Influence tactics. One person's actual behaviors designed to change another person's attitude, beliefs, values, or behaviors. Apart from leaders, followers can also wield power and influence over leaders as well as over each other. Influence can be measured by behaviors or attitudes manifested by followers as a result of a leader's influence and tactics. So I'll give you an example of just one example of influence, how somebody can be influenced by the politicians. The good ones, or if there are any good ones, the ones who, I should say the ones who are most effective, can influence people and get them to think certain things. I can get a good politician can get you to think something, to believe something is good when it's actually bad. When you look at the tactics and stuff, how can you have somebody who actually has control or can guide their leader? A direct report. An employee can get a leader to do what they need to do. It's because that person wields power and has influence, and even has influence not only with people they work with, but also their leader. Important distinctions. Leaders with relatively high amounts of power can cause fairly substantial changes in subordinates' attitudes and behaviors. So amount of power followers have in work situations can also be dramatically, very dramatically. Some followers may exert relatively more influence over a group than the leader does in certain situations. I refer to them as an alpha. A lot of times you see this when you have an alpha in a group. Usually somebody who is very experienced, knows their job real well, and they have a dominant type personality. Individuals with relatively large amounts of power may successfully employ a wider variety of influence tactics. Followers can use a wider variety of influence tactics than the leader. This is because the former leader is not always the person who possesses the most power in a leadership situation. Think about it. When you have an alpha in a group, that person's with the group more than the leader is. So they're around that person more. So they're in a position to actually wield more power than the leader, because the leader only comes around periodically. Sources of leader power. You have furniture arrangement, sharp of the table used for meetings and seating arrangement, prominently displays symbols, appearance of title and authority, choice of clothing, presence or absence of crisis, defining yourself not only as an individual but also as a group member. So there's various things that people can do to actually find sources of power, and everything's different. Everything is situational. I'll give you an example. Furniture arrangement. Everybody's sitting on the side, but I sit at the top of the table. Okay, and nobody sits on the other end. So everybody's on the sides, and I'm at the head of the table. Just something as simple as that. So you find all different types of things that people can do. Or choice of clothing. Everybody comes casual, but I actually wear a tie. Any number of things can happen, but when you have sources of power. So sources of leader power in the leader-follower situation framework. So if you look at this, you see how they overlap. You see the leader, the situation, the follower. So look at this leader, and you see expert, coercive, reward, reverent. And you see legitimate down here, situation. See, all this stuff overlaps. And what the leader has to be, the leader has to be fluid. He or she has to be different things at different times based upon what the situation is. And even the followers, their situations even change. Remember, a strong follower alpha can actually lead a leader if they're not careful. So even they have different roles and how things overlap, even within this situation framework. So French and Raven's basis of social power, exert power. So when we look at it, it's the power of knowledge. Some people can influence others with their relative expertise in particular areas. Followers may have more expert power than the leaders at times. It's different. Followers have considerable great amounts of expert power. The leader may be unable to influence them using expert power alone. So here, the alpha, remember I said earlier, a lot of times they have a lot of experience. They have knowledge. So if they are the SME, the subject matter expert, and the leader actually has very little experience and knowledge in that area, this could be a problem. Now, if the person is actually the alpha, is someone who's using their authority for the positive, it can be very good if the leader has a good relationship with them because they're lockstep. So realistically, the alpha's not doing anything that the leader doesn't want to happen. Reverent power. This is a potential influence one has because of the strength of the relationship between the leader and the followers. Takes time to develop but can be lost quickly. Desire to maintain reverent power may limit a leader's actions in certain situations. The stronger the relationship, the more influence leaders and followers exert over each other. Followers with relatively more reverent power than their peers are often spokesperson for their units and have more latitude to deviate from work unit norms. So because you have a working relationship or a type of sort of relationship between the leader and a certain follower, it's reverent power. So now I'm gonna tell you when that would change. That would change. Just say that the alpha has a reverent power with the leader and the relationship that they have. But if the leader was to change and another person comes in, that goes away. Legitimate power depends on a person's organizational role of his or her formal or official authority. So when you look at this is something that someone has by virtue of the position that they hold. So holding a position requires them to it gives them a legitimate authority through their position that they hold. The problem you run into sometimes is some of these people holding these positions doesn't mean that they are a leader. You may find sometimes that they're leader in title, but they're not in actuality. Nobody believes in them, nobody leads, and nobody follows them. So they can resist the leader's influence attempt by doing only work specifically prescribed in job descriptions, bureaucratic rules, or union policies. So in other words, they don't respect them, they'll do just enough to get by, even though the person actually has the legitimate authority. Reward power involves the potential to influence others through control over desired resources. So potential to influence others through reward policies, joint function of the leader follows in the situation. So in other words, when people do things that's liked, they get rewarded. Problems associated with rewards. Assumption that rewards given by a company to a worker could be similar to what the worker expected. Rewards may produce compliance, but not other desirable outcomes like commitment. So in other words, I'm not working because I believe in the product and believe what we do and I'm committed to doing it. I'm just trying to get paid or trying to get rewarded. Overemphasizing performance rewards as a payoff for performance can leave workers feeling resentful and manipulated. Extrinsic rewards such as a praise or compensation may not have the same effects as intrinsic rewards such as personal growth and development. All leaders can have some, and the most important rewards, sincere praise and thanks to others for loyalty and work. So it can work and it cannot work. It's going to be situational. And this is where the leaders got to be careful to understand exactly, am I doing something that's working or is this not working? So you got to be careful. It's situational. Leaders can enhance their ability to influence others based on reward power by determining what rewards are available and most valued by subordinates, establishing policies for the fair and consistent administration of rewards for good performance. Followers can exercise reward power over leaders by controlling scarce resources, modifying their level of effort based on the leader's performance. So again, you got to be careful. It could have an adverse effect when you get to the point where you have followers that's actually doing things to manipulate the leader. Coercive power, potential to influence others through the administration of negatives. So basically, this is when you look at this. This is the power to do something. I will do something to you if you don't get it done, and it's going to be something that you won't like. So followers that use coercive power to influence their leaders' behavior tend to have a relatively high amount of reverent power among coworkers. So concluding thoughts about French and Raven's power taxonomy. Leaders can usually exert more power during a crisis than during periods of relatively calm. During crisis, followers may be more eager to receive direction and control from leaders. Research indicates that leaders who rely on reverent and expert powers have subordinates who are more motivated and satisfied, or after less, perform better. So we have research to show where things, when it comes to leaders and subordinates, what's rendered better results and what has not. And even to some things, things have actually shown you some things that didn't work. Following generalizations can be made about power and influence. Effective leaders take advantage of all their sources of power. Leaders in well-functional organizations are open to being influenced by subordinates. Leaders vary in the extent to which they share power with subordinates. Effective leaders generally work to increase their various power bases or become more willing to use the coercive power. So, in other words, you got to be almost chameleon-like. You got to be willing, as a good leader, you got to be flexible. You got to be willing to try various things at various times because the situation dictates that you do so. So you don't have one leadership style. Leader motives. People vary in their motivation to influence or control others. This is known as a need for power and is expressed in the following ways. Personalized power is exercised for personal needs, selfish, impulsive, uninhibited individuals who lack self-control. Socialized power is used for the benefit of others or the organization and involves self-sacrifice. Thematic apperception tests, a projective personality test can assess the need for power. Need for power is found to be positively related to various leadership effectiveness criteria. So personalized power, to me, when I've seen that before, it was pretty evident, that what somebody does or what they do is self-serving. And when I've seen socialized power, every time I've seen it genuine. Now, I've seen some people try to pretend to do that, but you can see through that. But that's usually genuine. And I used to like, if I had an option, I would like to surround myself with people who exuded socialized power. Leaders who are relatively uninhibited in their need for power will use impulsively to manipulate or control others or achieve at others' expense. Leaders with high need for power but low activity inhibition may be successful in the short term, but remainder of the organization may pay high costs for their success. Some followers have a high need for power, which can lead to tension between the leader and the follower. So of these three right here, the ones that I can tell you is this. I'm looking at the third one. Some followers have a high need for power, which can lead to tension between the leader and the follower. Very common in the workplace. And when you see it, I can tell you that I've seen situations where you have a follower who's very competent, very knowledgeable, and a leader who's not. This person could then be viewed as a problem or a threat by that leader. And in some instances, the leader would do things to try to make things difficult for that person. Individuals vary in motivation to manage. Miner describes motivation to manage in terms of the following composites. Maintaining good relationships with authority figures, wanting to compete for recognition and advancement, being active and assertive, wanting to exercise influence over subordinates, being visibly different from followers, being willing to do routine administrative tasks. So the leader motives, they're going to be different. And they should be, depending upon the type of people you're managing, the situation that you're going through. It should be. And, at some point you find one of these that actually is probably going to be applicable to a certain type of situation that you're going through. That's the type of, and then you behave a certain way as a result of that. Minor sentence completion scale measures a person's motivation to manage. The overall composite score consistently predicts leadership success in hierarchy or bureaucratic organizations. Finding concerning needs for power and motivation to manage have several implications for leadership practitioners. Not all individuals like being leaders. High need for power or motivation to manage does not guarantee leadership success. So when you look at it, some people don't like being leaders. Uh, Unfortunately, some of them are in leadership positions. Now, I know that sounds strange, but it's true. And then you have a high need for power or motivation to manage does not guarantee success. Because somebody wants to be a leader does not mean that they're actually going to be able to do it either. High need for socialized power and a high level of activity inhibition may be required for long-term leadership success. So followers and leaders differ in the need for power, activity inhibition, and motivation to manage. So again, when you look at these situations, like for instance, the high need for socialized power and a high level of activity inhibition may be required for long-term leadership success. It may be. Types of influence tactics used by an agent or a target based on influence behavior. Right here, he said we see rational persuasion when logical arguments or factual evidence is used to influence others. I've always said facts don't lie. Evidence is, if it's strong and compelling, it can help people come to your side. Inspiration appeals. That's when a request or proposal is designed to arouse enthusiasm, emotions, and target. This is basically when you get people to respond to something because you make them feel good about it, or you make them feel like that's something to do. I call it the rah-rah approach, like the cheerleading, inspiring. Consultation, when targets are asked to participate, planning an activity. Okay, this is when you actually basically you sit down with folks. I think you get a high buy-in rate from people when they had the opportunity to participate and give input. I want you to think about something. Who says no to something that they actually help come up with? Ingratiation, when an agent attempts to get a target in a good mood before making a request. You got to be a little careful with this one because it can feel almost like, you're passing up to somebody. So you got to be careful about that. I'm boosting you up because it's something I want from you. A lot of people can see through that. Personal appeals, when a target is asked to do a favor out of friendship. This is based on relationships right here now. People don't, when you ask somebody to do something personal, you got to have a good relationship with them. Because if not, that's probably not going anywhere. Exchange, when a target is influenced through the exchange of favors. Quid pro quo, you do something for me, I do something for you. Coalition tactics, when agents seek the help of others to influence the target. So I'll give you an example. If I know Mike has a good relationship with Jim, I may go to Jim and ask Jim, hey, could you ask Mike to do something for me? Pressure tactics, when threats or persistent reminders are used to influence targets. Basically when you're telling people, hey, well, if you don't get this done, bad things are going to happen. I can't promise you you all probably not going to get a bonus this time or something, but it's something adverse. You're putting pressure on people to try to get them to do something or see something or feel something or think something. Legitimizing tactics, when agents make requests based on their position or authority. Okay, it's like when you go to someone as a group of people as the boss and says, okay, I had a meeting with my boss and here's what we need to do based upon this new policy or whatever else. So I need you guys to get this done and stuff. See, now you're telling them what needs to get done, why it needs to get done, but it's coming from you from a position of authority. A strong relationship exists between the relative power of agents and targets and the types of influence tactics used. Leaders with high reverent power generally do not use legitimizing or pressure tactics. Leaders who, with only coercive or legitimate power, tend to use coalition, legitimize, and pressure tactics. So, depending upon the type of power that someone has, will a lot of times depend on the tactics that they use. It makes sense. It will be consistent with it works that way versus someone, I'll give you an example. If someone doesn't have legitimate power and they're an alpha in a group, well, for them to come through and to use pressure tactics on somebody, it's like doesn't really work because you're my peer, so you have no power over me. Hard tactics are used when an influencer has the upper hand. Resistance is anticipated. The other person's behavior violates important norms. So there is a time, I used to always tell people as a leader, there's a time to ask people to do stuff, and then there's a time to tell people to do stuff. And you have to know the difference. I had no issues with that when I needed to do that, and good leaders don't. If someone has the upper hand or whatever else, and I'll give you someone's got the upper hand because he may work for me, and he knows more about this than I do and stuff. So he's got the knowledge upper hand on me, but I have the legitimate power. Resistance and anticipate when you know that the group may push back because they don't want to do something, and this happens a lot when leaders or people are talking to groups and they have resistance and it's anticipated. Here's what I normally tell people. In many cases, you can anticipate when the resistance will happen or transpire. Then prepare for that. Have not only a plan, but have a backup plan as well. Soft tactics are used when one is at a disadvantage. Resistance is expected. There is a personal benefit if the attempt is successful. So you got to know when to actually use a soft approach. Rational tactics are used when parties are relatively equal in power. Resistance is not anticipated benefits our organization as well as personal. So again, with the rash, lay out a compelling case. Use facts. For example, 2 and 2 is 4. You may not like it, but that's a fact. So when you making a compelling case, I used to tell people, make sure it's a case that's called the totality of the circumstances. Don't just tell them one thing. If it's 10 things you need to tell them for them to understand the full story and scope of something, tell them all 10. Using influence tactics is a social skill. Other ways to successfully influence superiors. Thoroughly preparing beforehand, involving others for support or coalition tactics, persisting through a combination of approaches. So this is what we refer to as managing up, trying to influence your superiors to get them to see something or agree with something that you're trying to do. Again, you got to be strategic. You got to prepare beforehand. And one thing that helps you is what type of leader do you have? Certain leaders, depending upon what type of leader you have, will determine what type of preparation you need to do. And also, too, try the coalition. Try not to let it look like it appear to be just your idea, but it's a good idea because you have multiple people who also see your perspective. That helps. So, and do a combination of things to figure out what works. People select influence tactics as a function of their power relationship with another. Relationship holds true universally across different social domains. So based upon what type of relationship you have with someone or lack thereof, also determines the type of influence that you can use. So a concluding thought. Leaders should pay attention to the actual influence tactics they use and why they believe particular methods are effective. Influence efforts intend to build others up more frequently lead to positive outcomes than influence efforts intended to put others down. So pay attention, be careful, know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and make sure it's something that makes sense. Summary. By reflecting on their different bases of power, leaders may better understand how they can affect followers and even expand their power. Leaders can improve their effectiveness by finding ways to enhance the value of their personal contribution to their team. Leadership encourage in-group and out-group rivalries from forming in the work unit. Exercise of power occurs primarily through the influence tactics leaders and followers use to modify each other's attitudes and behavior. Leadership practitioners should always consider why they are using a particular influence attempt before they use it. Because if you use the wrong one, you might get an adverse effect and a bad result. That concludes this chapter.